Sometimes, love doesn't fade. It just gets lost in time, buried under decades of silence, war, letters never sent, and phone calls never made. My grandfather, a man who had everything money could buy, had only one silent regret echoing in the chambers of his heart: the woman he let go. But no one expected what happened when he found her again. Not even him. He was expecting a joyful reunion, closure maybe. But instead, he walked into a room where the love of his life looked at him with blank eyes and said, "Do I know you, sir?" That's when everything changed. This isn't just a story about love found. It's a story about memory, sacrifice, second chances, and the painful beauty of forgetting and remembering at the same time. So grab a tissue, take a deep breath, and enjoy the story. My grandfather was a man of rituals. Every morning at 6 a.m., sharp as a soldier, he'd brew his coffee in that old Italian mocha pot, read the financial section of the paper, and check his wristwatch like the world depended on it. To the world he was composed, calculated, the kind of man who built an empire from dust and determination. But I always sensed something haunted him, especially whenever he opened the old safe hidden behind his office bookshelf. He never let anyone near it. Until one day, months before his diagnosis, he called me into the study and said, "I want you to see something. I can't keep this inside anymore." The safe creaked open with the slow groan of rusted hinges, revealing not stacks of cash or legal documents, but a single neatly folded letter, yellowed by time. He handed it to me with trembling fingers, and I read it aloud. It was dated July 17th, 1963, addressed to Elena. It spoke of regret, longing, and a promise to return. "If life had been kinder," it read, "you would have been my forever." The room fell silent after I finished. I looked at my grandfather. His eyes were glassy, a storm of pain hiding behind them. That was the moment I realized. This wasn't some long-lost flame he casually forgot. This was the one. The kind of love that never dies, no matter how many years pass or fortunes are built. I looked for her once, he confessed, but I was too late, or maybe too afraid. But now, something in him had shifted. It was as if opening that letter again had opened a door he thought he'd sealed forever. "Help me find her," he whispered. "If she's still alive, I need to see her again." And just like that, the search began. We didn't know much, just her name, Elena, and a blurry black and white photograph that had been folded so many times the creases nearly split her face in two. On the back, in his handwriting, were the words, "To the woman I should have never let go." No last name, no address, just a first name and a city, Nice, France. He hadn't seen her in over 60 years. How do you find someone after a lifetime has passed? But my grandfather wasn't the kind of man to be stopped by impossibility. "She's out there," he said, staring at that photo like it was a treasure map. "And if she remembers me, she'll know why I came." We hired a private investigator, made calls to every nursing home, every hospital, every old registry office in southern France. Days turned into weeks. Every night, my grandfather sat by the phone like a soldier waiting for orders. Until one morning, just after sunrise, the call came. A woman named Elena Moreau had been living in a small care facility near the old coastal district. No family, no visitors. But the nurse mentioned something strange. Every now and then she'd hum a song, the same song over and over. "Moon River." My grandfather froze. "That was our song," he whispered. That same evening, we booked the flight. He had his suit pressed, the one he wore only for weddings and funerals. "I want her to remember me as I was," he said, fixing his cufflinks with shaking hands. But deep down, we both knew memory isn't something you can summon on command, especially not when it's been stolen by something as cruel and invisible as Alzheimer's. Still, he held on to hope. That maybe love had left a mark so deep it defied even forgetting. When we arrived at the care facility, the air felt different. It was quiet, not sterile like a hospital, but soft, warm, almost sacred. Flowers climbed the old stone walls. and sunlight filtered through tall olive trees that stood like quiet witnesses to countless untold stories. The nurse led us through a narrow hallway, her voice barely above a whisper. "She spends her afternoons in the garden," she said. "She doesn't speak much. Some days she doesn't speak at all, but she smiles when the birds land near her." My grandfather gripped my arm, his steps slowing as if his body knew his heart couldn't take much more. Then we saw her, seated on a wooden bench beneath a blooming wisteria, wearing a pale blue cardigan and staring at nothing in particular. Her hair was white and wispy, her hands folded gently in her lap. There was an aura around her, fragile, like a candle flame that might go out if you breathed too hard. My grandfather stopped, frozen. "Elena," he whispered, almost afraid to disturb the moment. She didn't turn, didn't flinch. But something in her posture shifted, a flicker of tension, like a radio tuning in through static. He took a trembling step forward. "It's me," he said, his voice breaking. "It's Thomas." She turned slowly. Her eyes searched his face, lost in the fog of decades and dementia. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, with the gentlest voice imaginable, she asked, "Do I know you, sir?" The words hit like a wrecking ball. I saw something collapse inside my grandfather, like hope itself folding in on itself. But he didn't cry. He didn't flinch. He simply sat beside her, took her hand, and smiled. "No," he said softly, "but I know you, and that's enough for now." In that moment, love wasn't about memory. It was about presence. About sitting beside someone, even when they've forgotten the story, but you still remember every word. The next day, we brought an album. Not just any album, the album. Faded leather, pages stitched by hand, filled with old photographs my grandfather had kept hidden for decades. Most of them were black and white snapshots taken during his time in France. Marketplaces, riversides, cafes, and Elena. Young, vibrant, eyes filled with mischief. My grandfather placed the album gently on her lap and opened it to a picture of them dancing on a balcony somewhere in Nice. "That was Bastille Day," he told her. "You wore a red dress and I spilled wine on it. You were furious." She looked at the image with a puzzled expression. "That's me?" she asked. He nodded, trying to hold his voice steady. "That's us." She ran her fingers over the photo, slowly, like it might trigger something dormant. For a moment, her brow furrowed, like a cloud passed over the sun. "I remember the music," she said. "It was a waltz." My grandfather's breath caught in his throat. Yes, it was Strauss. Then something extraordinary happened. He stood up, held out his hand, and said, "May I have this dance?" The nurses looked startled, but Elena smiled. A soft, uncertain smile, but real. She reached out, placed her hand in his, and stood. Her steps were hesitant, her body frail, but together they moved. Slowly, gently. Two souls waltzing. Through time, no one spoke. Even the birds seemed to quiet down. My grandfather whispered the rhythm as he guided her. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And for a moment, just a flicker in time, she laid her head on his chest and whispered, "Thomas." I nearly lost it. That single word, his name, was everything. A crack in the armor of Alzheimer's, a glimpse into the love that still lived inside her, fighting to surface. He held her tighter, not because he thought the moment would last, but because he knew it wouldn't. And still, it was the most beautiful moment I've ever witnessed. The following days were a mix of heartbreak and miracles. Some mornings, she would call him Thomas without hesitation. Other times, she'd look at him with the distant politeness reserved for strangers, like a kind man who happened to be nearby. But my grandfather never flinched. He returned to the facility every single day, always with fresh flowers in hand. Not out of duty, but devotion. And each visit, he brought something. An old scarf she used to wear, the perfume she loved, a music box that played Moon River. He was trying to stitch together fragments, hoping the scent of lilac or the sound of a melody would guide her back to him for a few precious minutes. One afternoon, I found him sitting beside her in the garden, reading aloud from a book of poetry in French. Elena sat quietly, eyes closed, smiling faintly. "She doesn't always understand the words," he told me, "but she feels them, and that's enough." There was something deeply sacred in the way he treated her, not as a patient, not even as someone who owed him recognition, but as the woman he still loved, even if she no longer remembered loving him back. He never forced her to recall, never asked, "Do you remember this?" or "Don't you know who I am?" Instead, he just was, present, gentle, anchored in patience. One night, as we walked out of the facility, he stopped me beneath the olive trees. "You know," he said quietly, "people think love is about passion, about moments you never forget. But the deepest love is about staying, even when the other person forgets, even when there's no applause, no recognition, no reciprocation. You stay. Because love isn't something you get back, it's something you give. And if it returns, that's grace. But if it doesn't, you keep giving anyway." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded, realizing I was standing next to a man who had everything, yet chose to spend his final days giving love to someone who might never. Remember, he was there. One morning, I arrived earlier than usual and found my grandfather sitting alone beside her bed. Elena was still asleep, her breathing slow and steady, her hand resting gently on top of his. He held a folded piece of paper between his fingers. His eyes were red, but dry. There was a silence in the room, not heavy or tragic, but sacred, as if time itself had slowed down to witness what was happening. "I wrote her this letter 60 years ago, he said without looking up. "I never sent it. I was too proud, too afraid she had moved on. But now, I want to read it, even if she never hears a word." He unfolded the paper with the care of someone handling something holy. And then, with a voice full of love and regret, he began, "My dearest Elena, if you're reading this, it means I've finally gathered the courage I never had. I let you go because I thought it was what I had to do, because I didn't believe I could be enough for you. But the truth is, I never stopped thinking about you. Not one day has passed without your name brushing against my heart." His voice cracked, but he kept going. "If there's ever a way back to you, I'll find it, even if it takes a lifetime." He finished, folded the letter again, and placed it gently beside her on the pillow. She stirred slightly, murmured something unintelligible, and then went still again. "Maybe she won't understand," he said softly, brushing her hair from her forehead. "Maybe she'll never know what I just said. But I needed to say it. For her. For me. For the boy I used to be." I stood there, frozen, because in that moment, I understood something I'd never fully grasped before, that love isn't about perfect timing, or even being understood. Sometimes love is about showing up anyway, and speaking to the heart, even if the mind forgets. That Friday afternoon, the sky opened up. What began as a soft drizzle turned quickly into a warm, relentless rain that soaked the garden outside the facility. Most of the residents had retreated indoors, but not my grandfather. He wheeled Elena out onto the courtyard, covered her gently with a blanket, and positioned her beneath the old stone awning just beside the rose trellis. She always loved the rain, he told the nurse who tried to convince him to come back inside. It reminded her of home. And so there they sat, two souls in their twilight, sharing silence while the world around them dripped with memory. She looked up occasionally, eyes tracing the falling droplets as if trying to remember something, just beyond reach. Then, for a fleeting moment, she turned to him and said, "Thomas, do you remember the lake?" He froze. His hands trembled. "The lake? In Annecy?" he asked. She smiled. "You fell in." They both laughed. It wasn't a long memory. It didn't last. Moments later, she drifted away again, her gaze back on the rain. But for those 30 seconds, it was as if time collapsed, and the two of them were young again, barefoot by the water, drenched in laughter and love. When we got back inside, I watched him dry her hair with a towel, gently, like a man washing away the years. "I don't know how many days she has left," he told me quietly. "But if I can give her even a second of light, it'll be worth everything I've lost." I asked him if it hurt, seeing her come and go like that. He smiled with eyes full of quiet ache. "Of course it hurts. But love isn't supposed to be easy. It's supposed to mean something." And then, as if to underline his point, he pulled from his coat a new letter, one he'd written just that morning, because even if she didn't remember yesterday, he would keep writing to her, every single day. A week later, I arrived just after lunch and found the staff unusually quiet. One of the nurses pulled me aside. "You might want to prepare him," she whispered. "She had a difficult morning, confused, restless. She's asking for someone named Jean-Luc." I didn't know who that was, neither did my grandfather. But when we reached the garden, we found her standing, yes, standing by the fountain, barefoot on the wet grass, slowly spinning in small circles. Her arms were extended slightly, as if reaching for someone no one else could see. It was like watching a ghost in motion, beautiful, heartbreaking. My grandfather froze at the entrance. He didn't call out to her, didn't interrupt, just watched. There was something sacred in the way she moved. Her face was soft, dreamy. She whispered a few words in French, broken, childlike. "Je t'attendais. Pourquoi tu n'es pas venu? I waited for you. Why didn't you come?" Then she looked up at the sky and began to hum, slow and haunting. It wasn't Moon River. It was something older, something he said. She used to sing when she was scared, and just like that, his heart shattered in silence. "She's not here right now," he whispered, "but part of her is." Later that evening, he sat by her bedside, reading her a story in French, one of the fairy tales she once loved. She was still, distant, but she smiled once when he reached the ending. "The prince waited," he said, closing the book. "He never stopped waiting." She nodded slightly and murmured, "Good." That single word, barely audible, was everything. Maybe she didn't know who he was that night. Maybe she thought he was the prince. Maybe, in her heart, he always had been. And maybe that was the magic of it all, loving someone so deeply that you'd become whoever they needed you to be in that moment, even if it meant letting go of yourself. 2 days later, while sorting through some of my grandfather's storage trunks, I found something that took my breath away. A carefully wrapped box, covered in layers of yellowing paper and tied with a satin ribbon. It was heavier than it looked. I carried it downstairs and showed it to him. He went still, like the air had been knocked out of him. "Open it," he whispered. Inside was a wedding dress, ivory lace, delicate as cobwebs, still holding the scent of lavender and dust. "She never wore it," he said quietly. "She bought it the week before I left France. Said she had a feeling we'd need it." He traced the hem of the dress with shaking fingers. "I never proposed," he admitted. "I thought I'd come back when I was worthy of her. But by the time I returned, she had vanished. Her family moved. Letters unanswered. I assumed it was over." There was a deep ache in his voice, not of bitterness, but of mourning. Mourning for the life they almost had. "She kept it?" I asked. He nodded. "She said if the day ever came, she'd be ready." And now, nearly 60 years later, here it was, in his hands. A fragile reminder of promises unfulfilled and love that refused to die, even when buried by time. He brought the dress to the care facility the next morning, not to show her, not to remind her, but to honor her. He asked the staff to place it on a mannequin by her window. "Let her feel it near her," he said. "Maybe it'll speak to a part of her that's still awake." That afternoon, as sunlight poured through the curtains, Elena reached out and touched the fabric softly. No recognition in her eyes, No words, but a tear rolled down her cheek, and that was enough. Sometimes the body remembers what the mind forgets, and in that touch, in that silent tear, was the echo of a wedding that never happened, but was still somehow real. It happened on a Sunday, a quiet one. No visitors, no scheduled activities, just the soft hum of an old record player spinning in the common room. My grandfather brought his portable speaker that day and played Moon River one more time. He always said it was their anchor, the melody that once held them together. Elena was in her wheelchair, staring absently at a vase of white lilies. For the last 2 days, she hadn't said a word. Her hands had grown still, her eyes distant. We all feared she was slipping, fading into that place where even music couldn't reach her. But then, something shifted. The first few notes of the song echoed through the room, and suddenly, she blinked. Slowly, then again. She turned her head toward him, really looked at him. Not through him, but at him. "Thomas?" she said, barely above a whisper. His body froze. He leaned closer, unsure if he'd heard right. "Yes, Elena, I'm here." Her lips trembled, and then came the words, "You came back." A sob caught in his throat. "I told you I would," he whispered. Her hand found his, fragile but firm. "I waited," she said, "even when I forgot what for. I waited." It was as if the clouds had parted just long enough to let the sun through. For the next few minutes, she was fully there, not a ghost, not a shadow, but Elena, the woman he had fallen in love with, the one who used to dance barefoot in the kitchen and laugh until she cried. They talked about the lake, the red dress, the wine stain, the letter, everything. I stood at the door, unable to breathe, afraid that even blinking would break the spell. And then, just as suddenly, it faded. Her expression changed. Her grip loosened. "Where am I?" she asked. The light in her eyes dimmed again. But my grandfather didn't cry. He just held her hand tighter and said, "You're home." Her birthday came on the 1st of May. She didn't know it, didn't remember the date. When the staff brought out the cake and sang softly around her, she smiled politely, as if it were someone else's celebration. But my grandfather had been preparing for weeks. Not with a party or decorations. She wouldn't have recognized any of that. Instead, he brought something simple, something that once meant everything. A silver locket, heart-shaped, with a miniature portrait of her younger self inside, and a photo of him on the opposite side. He placed it gently around her neck, kissing her forehead as he clasped it shut. It was meant to be her wedding gift, he told me later, but I never had the chance. When she touched the locket, her fingers lingered on it, as if the weight of it sparked something deep inside. "It's pretty," she said. Then a pause. "Feels familiar." He smiled. "It should." For the rest of the afternoon, she held on to that necklace like it was the most important thing she owned. She didn't speak much, but her smile stayed. It wasn't joy like we knew it, but something gentler, like comfort, like safety. And my grandfather, for all his wealth and wisdom, looked like a man who had just received the greatest treasure of his life. Later that night, he sat beside her, holding her hand as she dozed off. "She forgot her birthday," I said quietly. He nodded, eyes fixed on her. But she remembered how to feel loved. That hit me in a way nothing else had. Because what is memory, if not a vessel for emotion? And even when the vessel breaks, sometimes the feeling remains. That day wasn't marked by candles or presents, but by the quiet miracle of presence. A man who chose to show up again and again, even if she never remembered. Because real love isn't measured by how often you're remembered, but by how deeply you're willing to remain. There was an old olive tree at the edge of the care facility's garden. It wasn't tall, but it was wide, with branches that stretched low and heavy, offering shade to a bench that had grown worn with time. That bench became their place. Every evening, if the weather allowed, my grandfather would wheel Elena to that spot. They didn't always speak. Sometimes they just watched the leaves sway or listened to the birds. But that tree held their silence. It held their history. One afternoon, he asked me to join them. He carried something wrapped in velvet, his old wedding ring, the one he never gave to anyone. He took her hand and slid the ring onto her finger. She didn't react at first. But then, as he whispered, "You were always my wife in my heart," she smiled. Not because she understood the ritual, but because she felt the tenderness in his voice, the devotion in his touch. "This is our altar," he said, nodding toward the tree. "This bench, this moment, these are the vows we never got to say." I watched, silent, as a man who had once stood in boardrooms and commanded empires now knelt beside a fragile woman who forgot him every other day and gave her the one thing he'd never given anyone: forever. She leaned her head onto his shoulder as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long golden rays across the garden. "Tell me a story," she whispered. He smiled. "It begins with a boy who met a girl in Nice, France, and spent the rest of his life trying to find her again." She chuckled softly, though I don't think she grasped the story was theirs. But it didn't matter, because in that sacred sliver of time, they weren't two people broken by years or illness. They were simply two hearts choosing each other, again beneath a tree that had watched them fall in love all over again. Autumn came quickly that year, as if time itself was accelerating. The leaves outside her window turned gold and crimson. The air grew sharper, and so did the signs. Elena's condition began to worsen. More confusion, more silence, more nights where even her own reflection startled her. The moments of clarity, those flickers of recognition, became fewer, shorter. She began mistaking my grandfather for a nurse, sometimes calling him Papa, other times staring at him like he was a stranger intruding on her world. It hurt. God. It hurt, but he never let it show. Every morning he arrived with flowers. Every evening he read her poetry she no longer understood. One day I asked him how he was coping. He paused, looked out at the fading horizon and said, "You don't grieve when they die. You grieve every time they forget who you are." Then he smiled, a tired, quiet smile. But I'd rather be forgotten by her every day than to have never known her at all. That night I watched him sit beside her bed, whispering memories into the air. He told her about the time she taught him how to dance, how she hated red wine but loved the sound of thunder, how she once wrote a love poem on a cafe napkin and made him swear to never lose it. She didn't react, didn't blink. But when he said, "You saved me," a single tear slid down her cheek. He reached up and wiped it away. "Even now," he said, "you're still saving me." And I understood in that moment that love was not about being seen, but about seeing. Loving someone, even when they disappear right in front of you. Staying, even when they leave without ever walking away. My grandfather wasn't just visiting the love of his life. He was standing guard over her soul, one story, one gesture, one poem at a time, refusing to let the world forget the woman she once was. It was a Sunday, clear skies, warm breeze, the kind of day that feels like a farewell wrapped in sunlight. My grandfather had asked the staff for something special, a small outdoor lunch beneath the olive tree. Just the two of them. They brought out a white tablecloth, a basket of bread, a small plate of cheese, and 2 glasses of sparkling grape juice. She wore a lavender scarf he'd given her months earlier, and though she didn't know who had given it to her, she smiled when he adjusted it around her shoulders. "You look beautiful," he told her. She blushed and said, "You're kind, sir." They talked, well, he talked, about Paris, about her laugh, about the bakery near the train station that used to sell her favorite eclairs. She listened, nodding occasionally, sipping her juice like a child attending tea with royalty. Then, for the briefest flicker, she said something that made everyone freeze. "You always hold the cup with 2 hands, she noted, staring at him. His eyes widened. "Elena?" he asked. She looked confused by her own words, like she didn't know where they had come from. But he smiled. "You remembered something." She laughed softly. "Did I?" He nodded. "Yes, and it was perfect." They stayed out for hours. No interruptions, no nurses, no doctors. Just the rustling of leaves and the sound of a man loving someone exactly as they were. That night, as I helped him back to the car, he looked up at the sky. "That was our last good day," he said, not with sadness, but with gratitude. "And I'll carry it until the end." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just held the silence with him. Because sometimes love's final gift is not a grand declaration or a perfect goodbye, but a quiet afternoon under a tree where time slows down, and for a moment, everything is enough. Elena passed away on a Wednesday morning. The nurse said, "She went peacefully, in her sleep, the silver locket still around her neck and the lavender scarf folded neatly beside her pillow." My grandfather was there. He had stayed the night, sitting in a chair beside her bed, whispering memories long after she had drifted into silence. He didn't cry when they told him. He simply kissed her forehead, smoothed her hair, and whispered, "You waited, and so did I, and now you can rest." Later that day, he asked me to take him back to the olive tree. He stood there in the fading afternoon light, holding the wedding dress in his arms, and said, "We made it, didn't we?" We buried her in a quiet cemetery overlooking the hills, with the dress folded beside her, the locket around her neck, and a copy of the letter he never got to send resting on her chest. He gave a eulogy no one will ever forget. He didn't speak of her illness or her forgetting. He spoke of their beginning, of cafes and laughter and red dresses, of promises made, broken, and finally fulfilled in the most unexpected way. "Alzheimer's," he said, "took her mind, but it never took her spirit, and it never touched the love I had for her, because love, real love, doesn't live in the brain. It lives in the soul." After the funeral, my grandfather changed. He grew quieter but lighter, like a man who had finally finished a chapter he waited a lifetime to write. He told me once, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, "I thought I was chasing memory, but I was chasing meaning. And I found it, not in her remembering me, but in me remembering her, fully, fiercely, until the very end." He passed away 6 months later, in his sleep, clutching the same letter he once read aloud in a garden. And now, when I visit their grave beneath that tree, I don't feel sorrow. I feel peace. Because some love stories never need a perfect memory, only a faithful heart that refuses to forget.